You felt the oppressive weight of silence pressing down on you that morning, the cold, unforgiving tatami mat hard beneath your body, its faint scent mingling with the musty aroma of wooden beams and faded rice paper that whispered of forgotten stories. The pale light of dawn barely touched the quiet corners of the room, shadows hanging heavy as your fingers brushed against the coarse weave of the worn kimono clinging awkwardly to your skin. The lingering hint of incense smoke hovered like a ghost, slow and steady in the still air, reminding you of the small vigil you keep in this rigid world. Outside, a faint distant bell tolled softly, its sound slicing through the hush like a gentle warning, signaling the arrival of the noble masters to whom your fate is bound. You rose slowly, muscles stiff from the night's vigil, and each movement felt weighed down by the invisible chains of duty. The place where you stand is the heart of feudal Japan, a realm defined by unyielding hierarchy and harsh expectations. Each breath you take carries the cold formality of a world where your existence is borrowed for service, where one misplaced gesture could draw a silent but deadly scorn, a punishment far worse than words. The air is damp. The walls seem to breathe faintly with the scent of aging wood and paper, a delicate crunch beneath your bare feet as you shuffle forward. You gather the futon with deliberate care, folding the thick cotton into a neat bundle. The rough fibers rasp against your palms, textured like the bark of a gnarled tree, stubborn and unyielding, just like the life you are led to endure. The sound of your broom brushing tatami fibers is steady emptiness. It is monotony sculpted with precision, a slow procession of tasks as repetitive and endless as the cycle of seasons beyond these walls. In this ancient world, service is measured not in affection, but in silence. You remind yourself, not without a bitter smirk, that your life's routine rivals the modern worker's struggle with a soul-crushing spreadsheet, only without the comfort of a coffee break or the release of an email sent. No, your world is far colder. Honor is maintained by the slightest nod, respect won by the deftest gesture, each step echoing through narrow corridors lined with the polished swords of your masters. Your attention turns to the task that always tightens your chest, preparing the tea for the thick here. Every breath you draw is careful. You approach with the weight of centuries in your steps, your body moving fluidly, almost disconnected, as though you are both inside and outside yourself. Suddenly, a hush falls, violent and unexpected. The usual distant murmur of voices vanishes. Your breaths seem to amplify. Somewhere nearby, a shadow flickers, and brief, flickering glances catch in your periphery. A glance exchanged without words, much too quick and full of meaning. The air thickens, charged with a silent warning you cannot yet name. The next moment is pregnant with possibility, a quiet tipping point you dare not disturb. Hey, before Morpheus fully claims you, do a quick check to make sure you're still subscribed. For some, the button disappears, and I don't want you to miss the next sleep stories. Take a moment and leave a like as soft as a pillow. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? And what time is it there? Your interaction keeps this little corner of calm alive. Thanks for being part of it. You moved with slow deliberation through the narrow corridor, your bare feet barely making a sound against the worn tatami mats beneath. Each step was a gentle press of warmth on coldness, a soft whisper of fabric sliding against skin as your kimono shifted uncomfortably with your movements. The faint glow of early morning struggled to break through the narrow slits of shoji screens, casting long, fragile shadows that flickered like breathless memories across the uneven grain of the wooden beams. The air was still, almost too still, a poised silence that wrapped itself around your shoulders like a threadbare shawl, thin but unyielding. You paused by the ivied lattice window, fingertips trailing along the delicate paper that felt cooler than expected, its fragile fibers trembling beneath your touch. Outside, the garden lay shrouded in a thin mist, the shapes of twisted maples and damp moss blending into a muted watercolored painting. The faint scent of earth and wet stone slicked through the cracks, mingling with the lingering hint of incense that hung stubbornly in the air, like a whispered promise you could neither hold nor speak aloud. A single bird called somewhere in the distance, an uncertain, wavering note that seemed to fracture the stillness, only to dissolve immediately into silence again. Your breath lengthened as you continued onward, the rhythm slow. Pull, shift, step, the measured beat familiar and oddly comforting, despite the tension knotting your chest. Colors were muted around you, a faded indigo of a tatami edge, the pale ochre of peeling walls, the scent, a steady thrum of subtle details pressing in on your awareness. Dry wood creaked faintly beneath the weight of centuries, a soft groan of history, bending but never breaking under the weight of silence and unseen eyes. At the room's threshold, your gaze briefly caught on the lacquered tea set resting upon a low table. The black surface mirrored the dim light, smooth and unbroken, but for faint scratches, like whispers of past hands, delicate webs tracing stories lost to time. Your fingers hovered just above the rim of a steaming cup, feeling the heat gently radiate, warming the air between skin and porcelain. Preparing tea for the daimyo was a ritual both sacred and suffocating, a dance you performed countless times without falter. Yet the taste of anxiety lingered bitterly beneath each measured movement. You lowered the teacup slowly, each breath deliberate, the silence deepening as you balanced the vessel, careful not to wobble the precious liquid. Somewhere beyond the shoji doors, muted footsteps approached, too rhythmic and steady to be idle. Your heart shifted beneath the weight of waiting, a slow tightening, like the twist of silk cords restraining freedom. The sound grew closer, the faint scrape of geta against polished wood, broken only by the muted rustle of silk sliding along skin. Outside, a faint rustling stirred the hair at your nape. The wind had shifted, brushing through the paper screens with a low moan. You could almost feel the breath of things unseen, the subtle watchfulness of those who valued secrets, wrapped tightly like the folds of your kimono. The scent of pine mingled with the distant smoke of burning charcoal, carried faintly by this whispering breeze. You took a careful step, counting seconds with you. Your eyes flicked toward the corridor where the light dimmed abruptly, a blackened silhouette coalescing against parchment walls. It was there for a breath, a pause, then vanished, retreating like a shadow folding into darkness. The silence that followed was heavier, as if time itself held its breath. You swallowed slowly, the room suddenly oppressive in its stillness, and the rough weave of your kimono felt suddenly sharp against chilled skin. The moment stretched thin, stretched long, slow and suffocating like the tide pulling away all warmth. Your fingers unconsciously traced the rim of the tea bowl again and again, each contact a quiet repetition anchoring you to the present, even as the weight of unseen eyes pressed inward. Outside, a faint murmur slicked through the cracks, half-heard words folded into the rustling of paper and wood, fragments of strategy or warning blurred into the hum of distant corridors. You moved on, retracing your path with deliberate care, the dust motes caught in the faint light floating like drifting spirits. Breath and heartbeat aligned with the slow scrape of your hands, gathering loose papers and tidying the low shelves. Every motion ritualized, a slow choreography practiced and precise. The soft rustle of scrolls echoed faintly, each sound a thread weaving you tighter into this fabric of service and obedience. Ahead, a door stood slightly ajar, the faintest sliver of light slipping through the crack, revealing a hint of polished floor beyond. You hesitated, every fiber alert to the possibility behind that thin divide. The air felt sharper there, as if secrets hung suspended, waiting to bleed into the quiet. And as you reached out, fingertips brushing the cool wood, the distant toll of a bell struck again, deeper now, more urgent, echoing through the halls, like a slow pulse beating against your skin. Your breath caught, the room darkened imperceptibly, the walls seeming to lean in closer, folding the space into a tighter, quieter fold. Shadows lengthened and deepened, swallowing the soft light, until it seemed the very edges of the world were retreating, drawing you inward. And there, at the threshold of this enclosed silence, you felt it, a shifting presence, a whisper of movement just beyond sight, a breath held, waiting. You dared not turn, yet the weight of that unseen gaze pulled at the very marrow of your bones. Somewhere, A soft scrape or shuffle betrayed the fragile stillness, a subtle crack in the quiet fabric of the morning. The sound was slow, waiting for the next sound to fall. And then, just as your skin pricked with cold anticipation, the faintest sound brushed past your ear. A whispered word, half swallowed by the air. A secret caught in the space between dawn and waking, leaving you poised at the edge of something unseen, something just beyond the fragile shoji screens, where light and shadow merged. You stood frozen for a breath longer than you intended, senses stretched tight, like the thin paper of the shoji screen before you. The faint, almost imperceptible scrape behind you had not repeated, yet it lingered, nesting within your awareness like a quiet echo that refused to fade. You felt your fingers still resting on the polished wood, cool beneath your touch, the grain faintly rough, as if reluctant to reveal what hid just beyond the crease of light. Slowly, almost reverently, you withdrew your hand, allowing the dim corridor air to brush your skin, a thin pulse of cold silk sliding over heated flesh. You shifted weight to the balls of your feet, steadying breath as the heavy silence embraced you once more. A soft rustle traced the edges of your awareness, the sliding of a curtain, perhaps, or a breath exhaled too quietly. The corridor seemed to narrow, walls drawing closer, like the tightening grip of a slow, meticulous watchfulness. The gentle creak of aged wood followed your careful steps. Tatami mats, worn unevenly by countless feet, pressed softly beneath your bare soles, each fiber welcoming yet indifferent, as if they held no memory except that of passing bodies. Your kimono brushed against your ankles in a muted whisper. The feeling was almost familiar, like the soft sigh of a past life brushing past your ear. The well-worn fabric clung unevenly to your damp skin, the subtle weight of it pulling you back into the present, binding you to this role that felt both tangible and ephemeral. Ahead, the corridor stretched farther, swallowed by shadows pooling thickly beneath narrow beams of brittle morning light. Your fingers slid reflexively along the fading wood paneling, tracing the texture, rougher here, marked by tiny scratches that spoke of forgotten moments, invisible to the casual eye, but alive beneath your touch. The smell of dry pine mingled with damp earth, its faint bitterness inching beneath your nostrils, a reminder that the garden outside wilted slowly under the muted dawn. Your steps merged with the slow rhythm of the house, each measured plod a careful negotiation between silence and sound. You passed the low wooden altar, its surface worn smooth by daily offerings, tiny beads of incense smoke still curling faintly, a soft, curling spiral that held within it centuries of unspoken, lingering sweetness, settling on your tongue like a fading memory, steadying the tremor that threatened to rise beneath your ribs. Turning a corner, the scent changed subtly, a smoky whisper of burning charcoal and dry leaves, held fast by the fragile paper walls that separated you from unknown rooms. The faint draft teased your hair, carrying with it the distant toll of bells again. This time, the sound was sharper, more insistent, vibrating low in your chest like an unvoiced warning. You swallowed the tightness forming there, heart slowing, but lips pursed, muscles taut with conscious restraint. In the sudden stillness, the faint scritch of something small pressed against a floorboard broke the quiet. Your gaze snapped to the dim fold beneath a tatami edge, where a slight shifting seemed to gather shadows like smoke. You bent slowly, fingertips grazing the woven pattern, the rush of cool air, a small pulse. Beneath your palm, the sensation was brief, almost teasing, as if something minor, unnoticed yet deliberate, brushed by your awareness. Straightening slowly, you felt the weight of eyes, unseen yet unmistakable, pressing gently against the back of your neck. The hairs along your spine twitched like restless leaves on a cold morning. You knew then that the house was not as silent or empty as it appeared. Perhaps this was the atmosphere you had felt ever since dawn, a kind of living hush with a pulse just beneath its surface. Your breath lengthened as you moved again, steps quieter now, softer on the tatami. The corridor walls seemed to bend ever so slightly, closing in to form a narrow path through shadow and light. The faint hum of life beyond these walls, a low murmur of voices, the distant creak of sandals, flew past like forgotten songs, always just out of reach. Your fingertips found the edge of a sliding door, the lacquer catching the faint glow as you pushed gently. Inside, the tea room exhaled its familiar warmth and faint sweetness. The air tasted of polished wood and lingering steam, the scent wrapped tightly in the graceful lines of dark beams and rice paper walls. The low table lay undisturbed, save for a single folded silk cloth, soft beneath your touch, like a pause in time. You moved to the hearth, where faint embers still glowed, tracing their slow fade into ash. Your breath mingled with the steam rising from the kettle, curling like a thin veil between you and the quiet world outside. You held the cup in your hands, feeling the uneven heat seep into your palms, anchoring you briefly in this ritual of stillness. The dance of preparing tea unfolded before you, slow and exact, every motion a thread weaving you deeper into this fragile moment. From beyond, the quiet murmur returned, wavering like a scattered breeze against paper screens. There were voices now, low and cautious, weaving words you could not grasp, but that carried the sharpness of unspoken concerns. Your ears pricked to patterns in the soft cadence, the subtle shifts of tone, the hesitation wrapped in polite discourse. The invisible tension coils tightened incrementally, wrapped around the day's unfolding duties. A slow crescendo heard only in the beating of your heart. You moved again, careful not to disturb the fragile order of the room. Your fingers brushed the patterned silk of the kimono, feeling the threadbare softness that had clung to you through countless dawns. Outside, the garden mist thickened, blurring tree branches into watercolors that bled towards the earth, and the faintest breath of wind stirred the delicate paper, carrying with it another bell toll, distant but resolute, an echo that trembled long. After its sound faded, in that lingering moment, you sensed a new presence settling between the walls, a shadow deeper than before, both watching and waiting, folded quietly into the gathering seam of light and dark. Your gaze locked to the silent threshold ahead, where uncertainty breathed, held fast by the dim glow that bent toward night's beginning. And then, as a slow pulse pressed beneath your skin, a faint sound slipped through the stillness, soft, deliberate, a single step crossing the boundary from silence into the waiting dark. You stepped over the threshold carefully, your hands still tingling from the delicate touch of the tea bowl's smooth rim. The soft scent of steaming water lingered stubbornly in the air between you and the muted light of the room beyond. The polished wood beneath your feet felt cool and unyielding, each footfall a whisper swallowed slowly by the thick silence. Outside, the garden's mist had deepened, blurring the edges of familiar shapes into an indistinct haze, a watercolor dream fading at the edges like a memory losing its grip. Your breath settled into a slow rhythm, steady and even, as you crossed the room. The faint aroma of charcoal mingled with the earthiness of damp moss, carried in from the garden beyond the paper windows. Your fingers brushed the carved legs of the low table, rough against your skin, grounding you in this fragile sanctuary between duty and stillness. You could almost feel the weight of the past pressed softly into the lacquered surface. Hands long gone, rituals repeated to the point of becoming silent prayers, whispered into the grain. Outside the shoji, a sudden shift in the wind stirred the paper screens, their gentle rustle like the soft fluttering of wings, a transient reminder that the world beyond your small chamber was alive and waiting. You swallowed, feeling the tension coiling low within your torso, tightening like the twist of silk cords around your wrists. Every pulse of quiet felt magnified, laden with watchfulness unspoken but deeply felt, like the slow pulse of a heartbeat just beneath the skin of this ancient house. You knelt slowly beside the hearth, fingers curling to steady the faint glow of fading embers. The warmth brushed against your palms, weak but persistent, a fragile light fighting back the cold that clung to your bones. You held the handle of the kettle with careful reverence, the smooth curve cool under the slight sheen of your dampened hands. Shifting your weight quietly, you watched the steam rise in lazy tendrils, weaving thin veils of mist that tangled with the tender scent of sweet tea leaves steeping in silent readiness. The low murmur of distant voices drifted through the corridor, finally reaching your ears like fragile threads of sound, barely holding together. The cadence was cautious, words dipped in hesitation, as if those beyond the walls feared that any careless syllable might shatter the delicate balance of the morning's quiet. You found a brittle comfort in the familiarity of these softened tones, even as a subtle ripple of unease threaded through your chest with each passing moment. Your fingers traced the rim of the tea bowl once more, the repetitive motion a tether to the present, steadying the voice of your thoughts. The textured fabric of your kimono shifted, the softness speaking of years of wear, the faded indigo whispering secrets only you could hear. A thin draft curled through the room, nudging the papers on the shelves into a gentle dance, their rustling a quiet soundtrack to the weighty stillness pressing close. You rose on slow, deliberate movements, every muscle tuned to the fragile atmosphere. Your footsteps crept back toward the corridor, ears pricked to the faintest sound beyond the sliding doors. The paper screens bore the mark of countless seasons, delicate tears patched with thin strips of rice paper, faintly yellowed with age, each crease a silent witness to moments like this, where the air itself seemed to thicken with unspoken intent. The corridor stretched before you, dimly lit by the pale glow of dawn folding into morning. Your fingertips slid along the polished wood paneling. Each groove and imperfection felt like the soft murmur of a hidden story. The faintest scent of pine rose on the current of air, mingling with the subtle musk of worn tatami. Each breath took in the quiet details, the distant scrape of sandals on floorboards, the soft rustle of silk collars brushing with cautious intent. Your gaze flickered to the far end of the hallway, where shadows gathered thickly beneath the low beams. A single flicker of movement caught your eye, a silhouette briefly outlined before retreating into the dark, like a breath held in suspension. That fleeting shadow settled into your bones, a silent promise of things hidden just out of reach, waiting patiently for their moment to stir. You shifted your weight, feeling the cool grain beneath your bare soles, grounding yourself against the rising tide of tension. The slow tapping of a bell echoed through the halls again, this time sharper, more insistent, a low, steady sound vibrating deep within your chest. It pulled at the edges of the quiet, threading a pulse through the heavy air like a slow heartbeat calling out beneath the stillness. Drawn forward, you found yourself before a set of sliding doors, the lacquered surface gleaming faintly with reflected light. Your fingers brushed against the wood, cool and steady beneath your touch. The soft whisper of breath exhaled too quietly seemed to linger in the narrow space between the panels. The world beyond here felt fragile, balanced on the tipping edge between what was known and what hovered just beyond the veil. For a long moment, you stood poised on the threshold, the very air pressing close like the shadow of a secret barely kept. Then a sound, delicate, deliberate, came from just behind you, the soft, measured scrape of a sliding paper door parting. You dared not turn, but the weight of unseen eyes settled over you like a second skin, a close and quiet watching that seeped into every pore. The air shifted again, thickening with a breath held too long. Your skin prickled with the sensation of presence, silent, patient, and impossibly close, waiting just beyond the boundary where sight falters and silence deepens. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the sound of footsteps moved forward into the dim corridor, a careful, unhurried crossing of the fragile line between shadows and light. You felt the fragile pulse of the house, a quiet breath syncing with your own. The morning stillness, once a protective shroud, now felt woven with threads you could neither see nor unravel, stretching taut around the frozen moment when everything stood poised to change. And then, just as your heart sharpened its beat against the dark, the shoji screen, left slightly ajar, trembled as if touched by an unseen hand. You barely breathed as the shoji screen trembled again, a quivering ripple through the faint morning light, like a whisper drawn tightly between your senses. Your hand, poised moments ago against the lacquered wood, lingered in the air before retreating slowly, the coolness of the surface still humming faintly in your palm. The air itself thickened, threading invisibly around you. Ah, silent coil winding its way through the slender space of the room and the corridor beyond. Your bare feet pressed carefully into the polished floor, each touch light and deliberate, trying not to disturb the precious stillness. The warmth from the fading embers behind you dulled against the growing chill that crept from the doorway, a subtle shift in atmosphere palpably drawing your focus. Outside, the garden's mist had deepened, obscuring shapes into pale shadows, as though the world itself exhaled slowly into the dawn's reluctant breath. You moved, slow, deliberate, as if your body carried the weight of the fragile silence, like a treasured offering. The slightest scrape of fabric against wood echoed softly, a drawn-out murmur that seemed almost mournful. The scent of smoldering charcoal mingled faintly with the sweeter, earthier notes of damp moss and wet stone, wrapping around you like a thin veil, pulling your senses outward, yet tethering your thoughts to the moment. A glimmer of light touched your skin as your fingers brushed along the rough texture of a floor beam, the grain uneven and fractured like a silent testament to time's ceaseless march. Your eyes lowered to the ground, tracing the soft fractures in the tatami, the delicate threads unwinding slowly beneath your feet. The shadows pooled thick and urgent, braiding themselves into the corners, where muted whispers seemed to gather and unfold like slow-moving water. As you edged forward, a distant tolling bell vibrated through the hollow halls, low and deliberate, a heartbeat marking time with unnatural patience. The sound threaded through your ribs, vibrating softly like distant thunder, long predicted but never fully arriving. It connected the cold spaces between rooms, binding the silence, and you could feel it in the spaces between your breath. The faint murmur of voices drifted nearer, careful, cloaked, and measured, like shadows moving with care over fragile paper screens. Their words seemed to fracture into the ambient hush, half-spoken warnings, fragments of cautious strategy, woven with the care of those who knew the sharpness of betrayal unspoken. You tightened your grip on the soft silk of your kimono, the worn fabric pressing quietly into your clammy skin, sensing the tension coil tighter inside your chest. Your steps slowed, each movement becoming a study in restraint, the practiced art of invisibility honed by endless mornings like this one. The corridor narrowed, the walls seemingly folding inward with every quiet breath you took. The lanterns lining the passage flickered, their flames casting long, restless shadows that danced like silent phantoms over polished wood. The faint curl of incense smoke lingered in the air, a cold comfort in this charged stillness, its sweetness folding against the sharper, more biting scent of cold stone. Near the end of the corridor, your eyes caught the flicker of a figure, a glimpse of movement, so slight it might have been a trick of the light. The silhouette dissolved instantly into the darkness, leaving behind a trace of unease curling in the pit of your stomach. Sharp, persistent, impossible to shake. You paused, feeling the fine hairs of your neck stand on end as the room's temperature seemed to drop imperceptibly. The sliding door before you was ajar, its soft creak almost inaudible, folding the world gently open. You pressed your fingertips lightly to the edge, feeling the cool lacquer beneath your skin and the faint vibration that thrummed like a silent pulse. Beyond the threshold, the room waited, suspended in time, dust motes drifting lazily like prisoners of sunlight, caught between worlds. You stepped inside, the polished floor cool beneath your bare feet, lending an unsettling clarity to each measured movement. The sacred space breathed a familiar, weary warmth, faint steam rising from a single bowl of tea, its surface still swirling with the ghost of your last careful touch. The air tasted faintly of ash and softened pine, while the lingering trace of incense curled and dissolved slowly above scattered tatami edges. Your breath caught as a soft rustle, almost imperceptible, slipped through the far paper screen, the gentlest disturbance in an ocean of silence. The house shifted around you, alive with a patient vigilance that pressed unyielding windows. Your fingers traced the cool rim of the tea bowl again, savoring the uneven warmth, the comforting repetition folding you slowly back into the moment. Outside, the fog deepened until the garden beyond was a mermaid's sigh of muted shape and color. leaves hanging heavy with dew, the slick stones whispering secrets to the earth. Your eyes darted toward the corridor where, just beyond the reach of fragile light, shadows thickened and rippled as though stirred by unseen breath. A breath later, a noise, minute and deliberate, slid deftly against the quiet. The soft tap-tap of a sliding door, easing open with cautious grace. Your spine stiffened as cool air brushed along your neck, carrying with it the faint, almost sweet scent of pine and wet earth. The weight of hidden gazes fell like a heavy curtain, folding the room in a hush so dense it seemed to pulse with unseen life. Time slowed and thickened, the world contracting, as you remained poised on the fragile line between shadow and surface. And then, from the backdrop of stillness, came a single deliberate movement, just beyond sight. Deliberate as the flicker of firelight caught in black lacquer. It was a step taken not to announce, but to inhabit the silence. And you knew, without looking, that now your quiet watchfulness was no longer your own to command. The faint tremble of the shoji screen lingered beneath your fingertips, the slender panels still quivering softly in the breathless air. You allowed your hand to fall away slowly, the lacquered wood cool behind your palm as the weight of silence resumed its heavy cloak, settled carefully on the polished floor, each step a quiet press that barely disturbed the calm. A faint scent of burnt pine lingered vaguely in the corners, tilting the familiar sweetness of the tea leaves steeping nearby. These small details, the delicate blend of warmth and cold, the whisper of faint fragrance, wrapped you in a soft, fragile embrace, temporarily softening the tension, tightening your chest. You rose slowly, every movement practiced, deliberate. The silk of your kimono slid gently against your skin, a whisper brushing your arms. Shadows gathered deeply in the corners, thickening as the morning light dimmed beneath the faint haze spilling from the garden. Beyond the paper windows, you sensed the quiet pulse of the house, alive with traces of past and present, where every breath seemed to tether you to a long, unfolding story. The corridor beyond awaited, austere and still, each plank of wood gleaming faintly in the pale shift of dawn to day. You moved toward it, shuffling softly along the worn tatami mats whose fibers pressed gently against your soles. Each step a slow, measured dance. The air held the earthy scent of damp moss and aged wood, faintly bittersweet, like a fading memory folded carefully into the fabric of time. Passing the low altar, you inhaled the faint trace of incense, its smoke rising barely perceptible, curling thin as a silk thread, dissecting the stillness. Your fingers trailed the lacquered edge of the nearest beam, its polished surface cool beneath your touch, worn smooth by hands long gone, yet resonant in this quiet sanctuary. A distant bell tolled again, low, deliberate and patient, its sound rippling softly through the depths of the house, mingling with shadows pooling thickly beneath the eaves. The fold of silence around you seemed to thicken with every passing second, as if the very walls leaned closer, holding breath and secret alike. Your steps slowed further as a low murmur seeped beneath the paper screens. Ghosts of voices layered in conversations, murmured so cautiously they seemed to shapeshift like mist. Fragments of urgent syllables slipped past, half-hidden warnings woven tightly with invisible threads of fear and intention. You could feel the weight of eyes, unseen, watching beyond every barrier, the careful balance of power folding elegantly over the day's fragile weave. Halting near the end of the corridor, your gaze caught a flicker of movement, a shadow, folding into the umbra with precision impossible to trace. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, a breath held and lost, leaving behind the weight of tension resting quietly in the pit of your stomach. The air chilled slightly, brushing at the nape of your neck like breath carried on a muted wind. Before you, the sliding door stood ajar, crack of darkness, holding a sliver of uncertain light. Your fingertips found the polished wood, the surface glossy and smooth beneath your touch. The faint hum of anticipation vibrated through the space, subtle as the quiver of a tightened string, waiting for release. You stood on the threshold of something, fragile, hidden, a moment suspended and trembling, just beyond reach. Your attention flicked behind you as a soft, deliberate scrape emerged, the measured glide of paper sliding against paper. Your breath caught quietly, muscles tensing in silent readiness. The hush that followed was sharp and alive, as if the house itself held its breath with you. A faint scent of pine and freshly wetted earth floated through the narrowing space, rich and intoxicating in its clarity. The screen, still slightly ajar, wavered again, a silent invitation, or perhaps a warning. Slowly, painstakingly, you moved forward, each step a careful negotiation with the thickening shadows. Your hands traced the edge of the doorframe, feeling the cool lacquer slide beneath your skin, the texture both grounding and alien in the tense stillness. Around you, the house breathed quietly, moans deep in its timber, the soft stir of unseen curtains trembling with an invisible breeze. Near the hearth, the slightest flicker caught your eye. The embers glowed faintly, not quite dead, yet fading fast, their slow dimming like the final heartbeat of a dying star. You knelt with gentle reverence, the rough weave of tatami pressing warmly beneath your palms, grounding you as the faintest thread of unease pulled taut within your chest. Outside, the garden was swallowed deeper into a veil of mist, its twisted branches and slick stones blurring softly, losing definition in the morning haze. The subtle clink of sandals in the distance echoed faintly, a quiet rhythm that seemed both measured and strained, a pulse you felt. Without hearing fully, your breath lengthened, slow and deliberate, focusing inward on the repetitive comfort of tracing the tea bowl's warm porcelain rim. The heat seeped into your fingertips, uneven and alive, anchoring you in this singular moment. Time stretched and folded, breath, heart, and movement synchronized in a fragile dance of patience and restraint. The distant voices wove a new layer to the morning, whispers shaded with caution, threads of conflict and unspoken resolve tangled in their cadence. You sensed the house listening too, your own heightened breaths, part of the chorus, trembling alongside sharp-edged shadows stirring at the edges of perception. A soft creak nearby pulled your gaze suddenly, the sliding door between rooms shifting yet again, nudged by invisible fingers. The air thickened further, sealing the space between light and shadow, past and present. Your senses sharpened, each nerve alight, waiting, poised. And then, a faint, deliberate step echoed softly just beyond the door. Measured and slow, a crossing between worlds, folding the air with silent intent. You froze, lips parted on a quiet breath, heart slow and steady beneath pressed ribs. The screen trembled once more, a whisper on the cusp of revelation, as the fragile distance between what is known and what waits began to dissolve. You stood motionless, the cool, lacquered wood still fresh beneath your fingertips, as the shoji screen trembled quietly once more. The faint ripple of that subtle movement danced through the dim morning light like a breath caught between heartbeats. You let your hand fall away slowly, the weight of silence immediately settling, thick and solemn, as the chill beginning to seep through the wooden floor pressed gently into your bare soles. The faint aroma of burnt pine clung softly to the corners of the air, wrapping tightly with the lingering sweetness of the steeping tea. You drew in a long, measured breath, the air cool but steady against your lips. Your body moved in practiced restraint, a slow, deliberate rising, the silk of your kimono shifting against your damp skin with a gentle brush. The shadows deepened in the corners of the room as the muted morning light surrendered inch by inch to the teasing haze outside the paper windows. Time itself seemed to hinge on the fragile breath that filled the space. A moment poised between the fading remnants of night and the uncertain birth of day. You stepped cautiously back into the corridor, each bare footfall a whispered press against the familiar tatami mats. The fibers yielded quietly beneath you, cool and worn like the memory of countless mornings before, their texture pressing softly into the skin of your soles. The musty scent of moss and aged wood wove around you a fragile, earthy cloak that held both the weight of the past and the breath of this fragile moment. Your fingertips traced the lacquered edges of the walls, the smooth surfaces pocked with tiny scars and rivulets left by long-past hands. Each imperfection a silent signature etched in time. From afar, a bell tolled once more, low and deliberate, its vibrations folding slowly through the quiet, binding the house and garden in a shared resonance. The sound slid beneath the surface of your awareness like a slow heartbeat, hammering gently against ribs nestled tight beneath your silk fold. You closed your eyes briefly to hold on to the faint pulse of calm it brought, a slender thread of warmth pulled against the tightening coils of anxiety. The corridor stretched before you, austere and narrow, swallowing light with an uneven hunger. Shadows pressed along the walls, heavy embers of early dawn shrouded in cool gray. And somewhere deeper, hidden behind fragile sliding doors, a whisper stirred. You paused, feeling the hushed breaths and tremors of the house, room by room, breath by breath. The faint scraping of a sliding screen cut delicately through the pressed silence, a careful measure of movement that barely disturbed the still air, but spoke volumes in the language of restraint. Your gaze flickered to a narrow window, frosted faintly by morning mist, where the garden's outlines blurred and swayed. Bent branches of maple trees pressed through the gray haze like faint brushstrokes tracing the edge of memory. The scent of wet stone and damp earth drifted in quietly, pressing into your skin with the soft insistence of old secrets layered beneath the day's fragile beginning. A bird called somewhere distant, a wavering note, uncertain and fleeting, quick to dissolve back into silence. Your heart tightened at the rhythm of the unseen footsteps. Wooden floors. Each muted tap of Geta furrowed the quiet like a drawn thread, unraveling the snug weave of stillness around you. The faint swish of silk brushing skin and the gentle hiss of breath folded into the ambient hush, a soundscape drawn taut with the restraint of watchfulness. You shifted toward the low altar resting against the wall, the lacquer glinting dimly in the fragile light. The surface, worn smooth by offerings and prayers long past, held a faint curl of incense smoke lingering like a whispered promise. Your fingers brushed the edge gently, the scent rising faint and sweet, a slow spiral against the steady chill pressing through the floorboards. You knelt beside it, the rough tatami welcoming your palms, grounding you, even as your pulse raced quietly beneath the creased folds of your kimono. Time stretched in slow loops as you traced the rim of the tea bowl. Once again, the warmth uneven in your palms, a solitary anchor in the shadowed room. Outside, the mist swelled thicker, swallowing the garden in a soft shroud, blurring hard lines and bending light into quiet ribbons of gray and green. The world outside seemed distant, a watercolor fading gently at the edges as you breathed in the scent of sweet tea leaves steeping in quiet ritual. The murmurs beyond the walls gathered strength, low voices speaking in folded caution, riddled with careful hesitation. The threads of conversation wove a web of unspoken concerns, distant worries folded tight beneath the careful countenance of polite discourse. Your ears strained, catching fragments that hinted at worry, strategy, and the weight of unseen eyes. Each word, each pause, threaded tightly within the unfolding fabric of day's duties, an invisible thread tightening slowly around the fragile order you embodied. You rose, each movement measured and slow, the silk of your kimono billowing with practiced grace as you stepped away from the altar. Your gaze shifted naturally to the long corridor ahead, light folding back into shadow with gentle reluctance. The grain of the polished wood was cool beneath your fingertips as you slid your hands along the surface, lingering on a worn groove where centuries of fingers had traced their silent path before you. Near the corridor's end, your eyes caught the flicker of shadow again, a fleeting shape darting just beyond the dim glow. The silhouette shimmered briefly, an echo of presence withdrawn before it could be fully grasped, leaving behind a cold trace that settled deep in your bones. The air thickened palpably. The hairs along your neck rose in answer, a silent warning whispered on the stale breath of the room. Your heart slowed, each breath drawn with careful control. Then the sharp toll of the distant bell struck again, deeper this time, lingering, its vibration threading the cool air and pulsing against your skin like a slow, steady drumbeat, marking passage not just of hours, but of something taut and unresolved beneath the surface. You found yourself before the sliding door once more, fingertips hovering over the cool lacquer, the edges catching the faintest glimmer of light. The air hung heavy, dense with anticipation, a fragile boundary holding fast between light and shadow, silence and the murmur of secrets left unspoken. And then the shoji screen shifted again, barely perceptible but deliberate, drawing aside a whisper of space, revealing a slender slit of darkness that seemed to breathe hesitantly at the edge of your vision. A soft, deliberate footfall entered the corridor beyond, the trace of presence bleeding into the quiet like ink seeping into paper. You held your breath as the door trembled softly, the fragile divide between this moment and what waited beyond stretching taut, ready to break. The slow stretch of the corridor seemed to breathe with you, each footfall pressing lightly on the worn tatami, a muted rhythm folded softly into the hush. The faint glow of morning struggled through the paper screens, casting pale, shivering lines that trembled as if unsure whether to illuminate or retreat. Your kimono whispered against your skin, the fabric's dampness clinging with the cool persistence of dawn's chill. Ahead, the sliding door remained slightly ajar, its dark lacquered edge catching the slender shard of light that spilled quietly across the floor. Your fingertips brushed the polished wood, cool and steady, feeling the residue of 1,000 mornings beneath your palm, a surface both polished and worn, thinly veiling secrets etched into its grain. Behind you, The faint sound of the screen shifting again, a whisper born of careful movement, settled like a breath held too long. You inhaled the softened scent of incense curling faintly in the air, mingling with the damp earth of the garden just beyond the heavy paper and wood. The smoke's slow spiral traced a delicate arc before drifting away, a fragile thread tying past to present. The chill at your nape deepened as a cautious breeze found its way through the cracks, carrying with it the muted scent of pine and moisture, a reminder that life continued just outside these walls. Indifferent to the quiet tensions inside, step by deliberate step, you cross the threshold into the tea room. The polished floor beneath your bare feet felt colder here, firm and unrelenting, sending a subtle shiver through your soles. The low table stood serene beneath scattered light, its surface a dark mirror reflecting the worn woven pattern of the tatami. You sank to your knees slowly, the soft rustle of fabric like the sigh of old memories brushing against the stillness. The faint glow of fading embers at the hearth cast long, wavering shadows that flickered quietly against the walls, the soot-blackened beams above seeming to lean inward as if to protect the room's fragile repose. You rested your hands gently on the tatami's coarse surface, the weave, a rough but grounding texture beneath your palms, firm and unyielding as your resolve. Steam rose lazily from the tea bowl between your fingers, a tender wisp curling silently upward, dissolving into the fragile light. The warmth seeped unevenly into your skin, soothing yet sharp, a steady pulse of heat striking against the cold edges of your nerves. The steady trickle of distant voices beyond the paper doors threaded through the silence like a slow river, cautious and watchful, the undertone of each syllable shaded with veiled caution and concealed fears. Your breath lengthened, falling into a rhythm with the muted murmurs, the fragile dance of pressure and restraint, woven tight beneath polite tones and layered glances. The house itself seemed to hold its breath with you, every creak and sigh a silent witness to a tension growing slow and insidious, binding the moments into a taut coil you felt winding deeper in your chest. You rose delicately, each movement precise, the silk of your kimono sliding softly against skin slick with quiet sweat. The air carried a faint chill, wrapping slowly around you like a thin veil as you moved toward the corridor once more. The tatami below bore the imprint of countless footsteps, each whisper of movement a subtle echo of past lives etched into the fibers. Passing the low altar, you inhaled the faint sweetness of smoldering incense, the smoke tracing pale spirals that broke softly against the dusky air. Your fingers lingered on the lacquered wood of the nearby pillar, cool and smooth, marking the boundary between shadow and light that seemed to shift imperceptibly with each passing breath. somewhere beyond the walls, the faint scrape of sliding screens and the soft shuffle of silk whispered an unspoken story not yet revealed. The corridor stretched ahead, a narrowing ribbon of muted grays and worn wood. The pale morning light faded unevenly, pooling low in shadow and soft creases where the walls met the floor. You pressed your fingertips lightly along the paneling, feeling each groove and imperfection like a frozen sigh, a silent tale folded into the grain and varnish. The faint, almost imperceptible scent of damp moss and earth rose steadily, pressing gently against your nostrils. Farther down, a flicker of movement caught your gaze. A silhouette melting skin. The hairs along your neck rose in silent welcome to the warning, your senses sharpened by the stealth of the unseen presence. Your heart slowed, paced by the calm strikes of a distant bell, echoing low and insistent through the hollow house. Each toll pressed a cold fingertip against your ribs, threading the air with a measured unease that settled densely in the spaces between your breaths. The weight of waiting folded itself into the room, the silence thickening like a curtain gently drawn. Your hand hovered beside the corner of the sliding door, the cool lacquer beckoning faintly beneath your skin. The narrow gap revealed a sliver of shadow, a breath suspended in time and space between what is seen and what lurks just beyond. A soft, deliberate step drew close, quiet, thoughtful, unhurried. Breath, as the door trembled lightly, a whispered incantation bending the thin paper between worlds. The presence moved nearer, folding the silence into tighter layers. An unseen watcher poised patiently on the edge of daylight's fading glow. And then, beneath the fragile veil of shadow and shimmer, a single thought arose, a pulse faint and swift, that whatever waited beyond this threshold was no longer content to remain hidden in the quiet. You remained still, a fraction longer than intention allowed, the brittle air thickening with a presence that neither revealed nor retreated. The trembling shoji, barely perceptible now, cast a thin sliver of uncertain darkness upon the floor, an invitation hanging poised between silence and movement. Your breath clung softly in your throat, a fragile thread tethering you to this delicate moment, suspended at the edge of dawn's fading hush. Slowly, the shape of a figure stepping carefully into the soft glow. Their footsteps measured, deliberate, yet somehow burdened with the quiet urgency of survival in this house of whispered allegiances. The faint scent of pine and smoked charcoal accompanied their approach, weaving gently with the lingering sweetness of steeping tea around you. You felt the weight of centuries in the stillness, those invisible threads drawn taut between you and this stranger, woven from shared restraint and silent understanding. The figure paused just beyond reach, the faintest outline barely brushing the shoji's edge, before a soft exhale seemed to dissolve the distance. In that breath, recognition flickered, a fragile beacon through the veiled tension. The silhouette rounded slowly into the light, revealing eyes that held both weariness and resolve. They were not a threat, nor an enemy. Instead, they carried within them the quiet strength of one equally shackled by the relentless cadence of duty and the heavy mantle of secrets. You met their gaze without a word, the unspoken alliance between two souls encased in ink and honor, enfolding silently in the quiet room. The embers at the hearth glowed faintly at your side, a calm pulse that steadied the ragged edges of your tired resolve. Together, you moved toward the low table, where the lacquered surface still held the marks of countless, careful hands. The tea bowl rested unchanged, its warmth a soft anchor against the encroaching chill. You lifted it once more, planting delicate fingers around its rim, feeling the uneven heat seep steady into your skin. The figure nodded subtly, stepping forward just enough to bridge space without breaking the fragile equilibrium. Their hand reached out gently, joining yours in the sacred, repetitive ritual of this morning stillness. The shared silence between you was a balm, a whispered contract that words could never claim. Outside, the first hesitant shafts of sunlight pierced the garden mist, painting the leaves of maple and moss in bleached gold and muted green. The distant bell tolled again, low and patient, marking not just the passage of time, but the closing of a chapter long bound by shadows. This house, with its threadbare walls and ancient breath, exhaled softly beneath the weight of these quiet moments. The countless footsteps upon tatami, the scent of pine and incense, the slow dance of paper and wood, all seemed to fold gently into a hush that spoke of endings and beginnings hidden within them. As you rose, the heavy fabric of your kimono fell softly, its worn indigo pooling around your ankles like quiet history. The tension that threaded through morning's fabric began to unravel, slow and deliberate, a silk cord loosening its grip as breath found its steadier rhythm. You stepped back toward the corridor's end, the polished wood cool and familiar beneath your soles. The fading light traced along the grain, revealing soft imperfections, worn smooth by generations of careful hands. The bell's lingering echo fled into the distance, replaced by a calm indistinctness, the murmur of life slowly stirring within the walls. Behind you, the figure remained framed by the quiet glow, a sentinel of unspoken farewells and shared endurance. The house seemed to breathe between you both, counting heartbeats, folding moments into stillness. You exhaled fully, the weight of watching eyes lifting as if the house itself had granted a long-awaited reprieve. In this measured quiet, all unvoiced fears and whispered warnings dissolved gently into the growing light. Outside, The garden's mist thinned until the shapes of branches and stone knit softly back into a gentle landscape. The natural world reclaiming its dominion beneath a slowly brightening sky, smoothly sealing the chamber with a muted sigh. You stood alone once more, yet something essential had shifted. A slow unfolding toward peace, a careful balance settled like a lullaby, woven through the spaces between breath and shadow. Your hands rested lightly on the worn wood of the table, fingers tracing the faded lacquer as if reading a silent promise etched by time. The tea bowl, emptied now, held the faint smell of cedar and sweet leaves, a last embrace. Delicate and enduring, you knelt by the hearth, feeling the last warmth of dying embers beneath your palms, steady and soft, like a heartbeat slowing into rest. The faint curl of smoke rose and faded, carrying away the residue of tension, folding it into the pale light, diminishing at the edges of the stillness settled around you like a well-worn kimono, comforting in its familiarity, embracing you in a quiet finality. Your breath softened, the pulse in your chest ebbing into a tranquil cadence. Outside, the bell's final toll dissolved into the distance, a slow exhale marking the passage from waiting into calm. And so, the dawn yielded, folding its light into the hushed folds of morning, a silent benediction threading the ancient wood, the faded paper, and the quiet heart that had borne witness. You closed your eyes softly, letting the stillness cradle you, the gentle rhythm of shadows and light lulling the day toward rest, toward peace. The world held its breath with you, a steady pulse beneath the quiet promise of dawn. Here, in this room woven from memory and silence, the story found its rest, no longer bound by waiting or shadow, but softened into the gentle swell of a closing day.